What's up, ghouls and gals? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we create content like what you're watching right now simply to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia, and sadly, spooky season is over, but let's talk about a few movies. Before I jump into the crux of this video, if you guys would like more information about our mental health resource library, Patreon, podcast, more movie reviews like this, and links to all of our socials and where to submit your nightmares, whether you're a screenwriter, a short filmmaker, or a feature filmmaker. Links are in the show notes below, along with our sponsor information as well for Horrific Hope Film Festival, which is our film festival. It's the first of its kind to be horror-centric and mental health focused. Now onto the show. So, this is the first year that I've ever actually been able to fully successfully do 31 days of horror. Typically in the past, I've either traveled a lot, I have just been busy with work, I've found myself kind of burnt out on horror halfway through the month. That list goes on and on and on and on. And when I say that I was burnt out, I watch horror year round, and the social pressures that I placed on myself in order to complete this list was just unreal. And so I kind of just, threw it to the wind this year. I said if I do it, I'd do it. And, well, I did it. So let's jump into what 31 Days of Horror is all about. So if you guys are new to the genre, you guys are new to this channel, 31 Days of Horror is basically an unwritten celebration amongst horror fans and cinephiles alike, where they essentially map out and challenge themselves to watch one scary movie, every day for 31 days, the entire month of October. And like I said, this was the first year that I've been able to do it. So I want to count down my top 5 favorite films that I came across this year. But in the process, I did revisit some classics / childhood favorites, and so these ones are going to be my rewatches which include Hellraiser Judgment, Trick or Treat, Halloween 1978, 2018's Halloween, Halloween Kills, Devil's Rejects, Frankenstein, which you guys can check out our episode on. It's down at provided links in the show notes below. 3 from Hell, The Shining, 31, which you can subscribe to our Patreon and hear our podcast about it and help us get mental health resources into Comic Cons, horror cons, and film festivals as well. Of course, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, Nope, and Night of the Living Dead, Terrifier 2, and Casper Meets Wendy. So I want to put a preface on the Terrifier 2. I was lucky enough to actually see the film before it hit theaters and Screambox. And so that will not be on this list because for me it was a second viewing. Well, let's jump into it, shall we? Number 5. If you guys couldn't tell by my moniker, I love things that make me feel nostalgic, things that remind me of my childhood and kind of how I got into horror. So I still hold a special place in my heart for things like Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark, and other kind of gateway horror movies like that. And so at number 5, I'm going to go ahead and put the brand new Christopher Lloyd movie, Spirit Halloween, the movie. This movie is a 90-minute advertisement for Spirit Halloween. Let me just start off by saying that. But it's actually really delightful. It reminds me a lot of Goosebumps. It reminds me of Erie, Indiana. Are You Afraid of the Dark? A lot of those gateway horror shows and books that I grew up just invested in. Characters are actually really likable in this movie. I am kind of annoyed by modern day family media. I feel like they just kind of make the kids a little bit too corny, a little bit too cheesy. And these kids actually had some depth to them. Not to mention, from a mental health perspective, this movie also deals with grief and loss and kind of processing death as a child, which I thought was a fascinating angle to add to this. Plus, it's just a lot of fun. This is probably one of the best performances I've seen Christopher Lloyd give in a long time. And yes, I'm putting this up there with Nobody. I really loved him in that movie as well. And I just find this movie. It's now streaming on VOD, and this was just a lot of fun. So if you guys haven't seen it, if you guys have seen it, let me know in the comments below. Number 4. So number 4, I'm going to take it back to the year 1990, way before I was ever born, and give you guys a little bit of history. So in the 80s, after the juggernauts of Halloween and Friday the 13th, and right around the time that Freddy started kind of creeping into our dreams, there was a big slasher boom of the 80s that was direct to video and so on and so forth. Now, I've seen a couple of these titles throughout the years, and some of them are really solid, and then some of them are just really just lame. They're really lackluster. And this one sits right on the cusp of that boom and when the slasher genre started to become stale. And that is Pledge Night. Now, this movie is already really uncomfortable because essentially you have a group of gentlemen that are going through Hell Week in order to become part of a fraternity. And even before the horror aspects of this, I don't know if you guys have ever seen movies that deal with college hazing. They're really uncomfortable sequences, and Pledge Night actually has some of the most uncomfortable sequences I've ever seen put to film. But once it actually kind of gets into the horror, it has some really classic slasher gags, but it's the twist of this like undead zombie killer coming into the third act that really just kind of elevates this movie for me. The writing is cheesy, the acting is kind of all over the place. It's kind of got a little bit of that campy vibe that you have from like direct-to-video 90s and 80s movies. And I just had a lot of fun with this. And it's now streaming on Shudder if you guys want to check it out or revisit it. If you guys have seen it, let me know. Number 3. And number 3, I don't know how I haven't seen this movie up until now, but it would be David Fincher's Seven, which we recently just did an episode about. I'll have the links in the show notes below. But this movie was honestly just such a gripping story. The performances are amazing. The cinematography is gorgeous. The horror aspects. For a mainstream horror film, this actually feels terrifying and feels like it has stakes, which is something that I always really like. There are some really grotesque gags in this movie, and also, I will also say this, that one of the gags actually ends up becoming a Saw trap later on in the Saw franchise, and we talked all about that in the episode. Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Kevin Spacey, just across the board, performances in this movie are immaculate, and this is just one of the biggest surprises I've had in my horror watches recently. I feel like sometimes you hear someone say, oh yeah, this movie's so great, and there's just no possible way that it can live up to the hype. I'm really glad to say that Seven actually lived up to the hype. As of this video, Seven is now streaming on Peacock. Number 2. My second pick is actually going to be a documentary, and I don't know if that's a cop-out or not allowed to have on this list, but this is my list, so I'm placing it here. And while the majority of us have been accustomed to Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. being reserved for the one and only serial killer doll that started it all, Mr. Brad Dourif's as Chucky on Sci-Fi and USA, Kira Gardner was producing a movie of her own. At number 2, I'm going to put the documentary Living with Chucky, and this movie is kind of an inclusive look at the Child's Play / Chucky franchise. If you guys have seen movies like Leviathan, Never Sleep Again, Camp Crystal Lake Memories, this movie is one you need to put on your radar. If you guys have Letterboxd, make sure that you guys put this on your watch list. This movie is honestly probably one of the best horror documentaries I've ever seen. One of the things about those 3 that I just mentioned is their length. If you guys haven't seen any of those 3 movies, they are easily 3 to 4 hours long because they are such an incredible look into the franchises as a whole, talking about everything from the film, the cultural impact, the marketing, the merchandising, etc. And what I liked about Living with Chucky is I liked how bite-sized it feels. This movie clocks in on under 2 hours, and it has an immersive experience of telling not only the culture behind the scenes, but also the cultural impact of Chucky through the Child Plays trilogy and the Universal era to the era that we now know him as today. And what I liked about this movie is it feels intimate. And that's what I've really truly liked about it. When you look at other documentaries based on horror franchises, they're telling it from a fan's perspective. Whereas this movie is actually telling it from a family perspective, because the writer-director of this movie is the daughter of Tony Gardner, who actually is the special effects supervisor for the last 3 films and the current series. This movie is now currently making its festival run. I really love this movie. Go check it out. It's Living with Chucky. And my number one, if you guys listen to any of our podcasts that we put out in the month of October, I think you guys already know what my answer for this one is going to be. And that's actually going to be David Bruckner's Hellraiser. This movie is currently my favorite film of the year. I could not express in words how much I love this film. I've watched it 3 times already, and I'm planning to probably watch it a 4th and 5th time before the end of the year. I loved how the film integrated the Cenobites and the culture around it. I think that the Roland as the actual bad guy along with the Cenobites was brilliant. I love the pacing of this movie. The performances across the board were incredible. Practical effects have been amazing. My entire Instagram feed has been nothing but Hellraiser because I followed every special effects and every actor attached to this project. And I absolutely just cannot recommend this movie enough. This movie across the board was just this movie lived up to my expectations, and I absolutely loved this movie. It's now streaming on Hulu, and if you guys have seen the movie, what did you guys think about it? Let me know. And as always, if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, click the links in the descriptions below to check out our mental health resource library. And while you're down there in the comments, let me know what movie you guys checked out for the first time this past October, and what horror movies you watched as well. And hit that subscribe button. We'll be back later this week talking about She-Hulk and Animon Returns with Howl's Moving Castle. Have a good night, guys.